I've always really liked hearing about clever business models. Ones preferably where all sides win kind of thing. It's so easy to think about a lot of business models as sort of a zero-sum game. And I know this isn't explicitly true, but if you take the most simple sort of one person gives up time to do a thing for another person, the other person pays them. It's kind of a zero-sum game, right? Like the money just exchanges hands. So if person B pays the person A $50 to do a thing, sure, the service has been accomplished, but you still only have $50. Like it just it changed from one person to the other. So nobody got extra in some way, right? Obviously there, again, I'm oversimplifying here. It's not really a zero-sum game because you've got, of course, the service was accomplished and that presumably brings some value, but it didn't multiply at least the dollars in any case. But I that's a simple model, right? Like one person does something for someone else and they get paid for it. And that's a very simple business model and it makes a lot of sense. But I've always liked hearing about things that are a little more clever. When I was in grad school, I did a project on reCAPTCHA, which I thought was fascinating. And I know that, you got to rewind a little bit. At the time, CAPTCHAs weren't quite as widely hated as they are today. This was sort of in the days of, most sites' CAPTCHAs really kind of sucked and were so hard to figure out. reCAPTCHA was one of the early services that would provide CAPTCHAs for you to put on your site for free. It was kind of a positive thing at the time. But anyway, so it came out of Carnegie Mellon, as I recall. And what was clever about it, so reCAPTCHA provided a little JavaScript snippet that you could put on your website and along with some documentation so that you could implement CAPTCHAs to help reduce spam on your website. And it did this for free to the website owner. And that was one of the things that set it aside. There were some other spam and phishing, prevention services, but you had to pay for them. So as a website owner, to be able to do it for free, and it was a pretty good one too. It worked well. It looked reasonably nice. I mean, as nice as a CAPTCHA can. Had some accessibility options. It was pretty good. But of course, reCAPTCHA somewhere has to get paid, right? Otherwise, they just go under. You can't just provide unlimited, technical services like this and never make any money out of it. That will be fraught with problems. It's not like it was just an open source project that had volunteers working on it or something. So the way this worked was, and if you think about a CAPTCHA, right, it's those little things where it's got really blurry text. I mean, back then it was pretty much just text. Now there's images and all kinds of other stuff, but at the time it was text. Blurry text, difficult to read. So the idea being that a human would be able to see this, but a bot or a crawler or a spam thing or whatever wouldn't be able to as easily. So what reCAPTCHA did that was clever was they went to libraries. And libraries were, at the time, OCRing their books, right? Optical character recognition, I think that stands for. The idea being that it's digitizing books, right? So it's a system, a machine that will read through the book pages and transcribe that into digital text. Now, if you think about that process, as a machine goes through a page of a book, it will inevitably hit words, phrases, maybe messed up pages, whatever, that it can't tell what it says with a high degree of confidence. So if you think about that at a scale, like let's say you were transcribing a novel or whatever, let's say it was 500 pages. What if every few pages there was at least one word on the page that it couldn't figure out for whatever reason, just blurry, or it was printed poorly, or there's a tear in the page, or whatever. So what reCAPTCHA did, the way those systems work is when it hits those, it sort of puts them off into I assume it's a folder or something, and says, hey, here's stuff we couldn't figure out. So reCAPTCHA went to these libraries that were doing this and essentially said, hey, give us your folder of stuff that your OCRs can't read. And they then took those and displayed them as the CAPTCHA images. And then they would display it across hundreds and thousands of people, right? Because they would be showing these CAPTCHAs across all these websites. So people were essentially helping to supplement the OCR machines so that and then reCAPTCHA would give those texts once the confidence rate was high enough. Once, if you think about, let's say 200 people get this particular failed word that that an OCR couldn't figure out. Let's say 180 of those people all answer with the same word. It looks like cat, but maybe 180 people wrote cat and then a couple people wrote like kit or something and they couldn't make it out. But if 180 out of 200 said it was cat, they'll ship it back to the library and say, this word was this word was this. And think about that at scale, right? Across all these words, essentially reCAPTCHA at the time was helping to finish out OCR that, digitizing books and magazines and stuff that OCR couldn't figure out. And then the libraries would, and this is the key, the libraries would pay reCAPTCHA, probably by the word or something, in terms of, helping complete out its process. So the libraries are getting their books digitized. They don't need to have people manually looking at all these things to make sure that they're right, which would be very costly. They're probably paying, pennies on the dollar compared to what labor would need to do. reCAPTCHA gets to provide this service for free. Websites at the time get less spam traffic. Everybody kind of wins, right? Like the library's not paying as much as it would. reCAPTCHA's still making money, and they eventually got bought up. I forget who they got. Did they get bought up by Google? Now I can't remember. They did get bought eventually, but they were getting paid. They could pay to make the service better over time, and website owners were winning because, again, at the time, CAPTCHAs were a pretty good solution. And I always thought that was really clever. It stuck with me because those are and I've heard other kind of similar things along the way from, other business models and stuff. But when I hear something like that, I love it. I think it's just so clever and interesting. From what I understand, the early days of Amazon, and maybe they still do this stuff, but I had heard this story about the early days of Amazon and how they managed to, at the time, sell everything so inexpensively. And the general idea went like this. And I've tried to validate this story a couple of times since I heard this quite a while ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago. And I validated like pieces of it, but I hear different renditions on it. But the story that I was told went like this. In the early days, if you think about a normal retail company, let's say you go to the mall or something, and they have supply that comes in, so they have to pay their suppliers, right? So they're working on like a net 30 kind of thing. So let's say that you're a shoe store, you get 100 pairs of shoes in, then the supplier sends you a bill and says you have 30 days to pay us for these 100 shoes. So then you sell, some shoes or whatever, and your business is all about cash flow at that point, right? You need money coming in so that you can pay your suppliers on the other side. And you have 30 days to settle any given bill. And what I had heard about Amazon, again, I never 100% validated this because it's just been hard to chase down, but that instead of doing like a net 30, that they cut deals with their suppliers that was like net 45. And so the difference was they would get to hold on to the money that it was coming in a little bit longer than your typical retailer. And what they would do is they would have that in accounts that accrued interest. So essentially, they were getting 15 extra days worth of interest on any given, purchase. And then you look at that at scale, and it accounts, it results in millions and millions and millions of dollars, right? And it's not to say that's the only way they were making money. Like obviously they had margins and whatever else, but the retailers at that time were flocking, and I mean they still are, but flocking to sell on Amazon, they were willing to cut these deals because for them, 15 days didn't mean much. For Amazon, since they were dealing with so many different suppliers, that 15 and, customers and everything else, that 15 days made all the difference in the world. And they were able to multiply money just by accruing interest on 15 extra days of hanging on to cash. Again, interesting business model, right? So in the spirit, and what made me want to talk about this, particularly right now, is that sort of in the interest of, or in the spirit of, the holidays, and here in the States at least, Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year, and, often thought of as a time for giving and thinking about maybe people less fortunate, or however you want to frame it to yourself. I happened to be listening to an episode of You Are Not So Smart, which I'll link to. And on the show, he has a guest. And the guest is a guy named Joshua Green. And he's done all sorts of really interesting research, much of it around, ethics and morality, and where kind of philosophy and psychology kind of intersect, and just a bunch of interesting different things. But so the way that he explained this, he started a charitable organization. And the idea goes like this. Many people who give to charity have their couple of favorite charities that they like to give to. However, the charities that you like to give to might not be the most effective. So for instance, and I'm just going to make this up, you give $100 to breast cancer research, and that money, even aside from the fact that maybe the one you're giving to has a bunch of administrative stuff that like sucks up a lot of your $100, even if you don't count that, and you assume that the full $100 is going to research, $100 in the research world means very little. It doesn't go very far, right? Compared to, there are other charities where for $100 you can pull like an entire small village out of poverty with very high effectiveness rates. And there's apparently a bunch of research around this. So his charitable thing does a couple of things. First of all, it recommends, if you let's say you have $100 and you want to give $100 to something, it recommends, the system will allow you to give to whatever charity you want. However, it will then also tell you, hey, here's a few really highly effective ones where your $100 will go really, really far and really make a huge difference. And then the website allows you to do a kind of a slider where it says, hey, do you want to put, maybe 30% towards this one and 75% toward that one? And if you want to just give to the one you want to give to, it facilitates that too, but it gives you some other information. It's sort of educational, right? It's like, hey, we see you're trying to give $100. Have you ever thought about this other thing? And maybe instead of giving $100 just to this one, maybe you go 50-50 split or something like that. So that's one thing it does. It also asks you if you would be willing, instead of taking your money and putting it directly into the charity, would you instead be willing to take your money and put it into a fund that will fund the next person who comes around, or maybe a person, a month from now or whatever, who wants to give to charity? And the reason it does that is because then the system behind the scenes is, instead of going directly to the charity, if you put it in their fund, then their fund can accrue interest on it and with their investments and whatnot for that month. And then when it gets paid out later, what they do is put some sort of match on top of your donation. So in the long run, your charitable donation of $100 might be worth $150 or something, if you're willing to trust his organization that, they'll make a good judgment with that later. And I'm broad stroking through this a little bit, but the general idea, and what made me think about all this, is that it's again a clever business model. They'll let you do just giving to charity. They'll also try to educate you on what some good potential charities might be. And maybe you want to split 50% over here and 50% of your donation over there. which is not a thing that really most of these things do. And then on top of all of that, it's also building a background fund that passively earns enough money where they will also contribute additional money on top of your donation if you're willing to just kind of delay your donation for a little while. And again, it's sort of like an everybody wins thing, right? You get to give to what you want. You also get to give to some things that maybe you didn't realize were so incredibly effective. And in the episode, and I'll link to it, he goes through some examples on this of like stuff that's very highly effective and what that looks like and things like that. So you get to learn about that. You can then give to that on the spot if you are so inspired. And you can actually, if you set it all up the way they want you to, your money can stretch even further than it would have if you just gave to your charity down the street or whatever. It's like a business model for good, right? And it's clever and it works. And from what I understand, they're growing. He mentions that they're up to some, a few $1 million. I forget if that was in a fund or if that was $1 million, several $1 million have been given, or I can't remember all the exact details. But it's a great episode overall because the episode kind of seamlessly moves between like, well, listen to it for yourself, but they pair up this idea of this charitable organization with the trolley problem, where it's like, oh, do you pull a lever and kill 5 people or 1 kind of thing? And the idea, this guy's done a bunch of research on that, I guess, over time. And the idea is that this is almost like the flip side of it. Like, this is how you, instead of worrying about, are you going to kill 5 or 1, here's how you can help 5 or 1 or both, right? But take a listen to the episode. I'll link to all this stuff, but if you're in this sounded like a very up my alley kind of thing. And if you're moving toward doing some giving this season, I would strongly say take a look at this. That I probably should have named it. Giving Multiplier is the thing. And again, there'll be a link to that in the description. But take a look at it, and it explains how it works, and whole episode on this from You Are Not So Smart. Definitely worth taking a listen to if you're in the market for that sort of thing this season.